My name's Phillips. I'm a planner by profession, master planner through interest, and I've worked for David Lock Associates now for just over 20 years. Cranbrook is a project that David Lock Associates have worked on since before I joined, actually back to the late 1990s, and are still working on today. New towns is obviously very high up on the political agenda at the moment, so I think that's really what I was particularly asked to talk about. So I'm going to focus on talking to you particularly perhaps about the 2D planning of a master town, a new town, where it came from, and then in terms of the delivery, how we got on site and have delivered where we have up to till today. Some brief headlines up there about new towns, how many there have been. The main point really, there haven't been many new settlements that have been delivered through local plan allocations, and then the private sector-led delivery of an outline planning application of reserved matters. Most of those, I think, if you look around the country, are urban extensions rather than actually sort of looking at the geographic and spatial planning and finding a good location for a new settlement. Cranbrook was brought forward by Devon County Council, then East Devon District Council, and a consortium of developers. It started with Wilson Connolly back in the 90s. They then, other landowners, joined into one consortium, and over time, as they've merged, acquired, brought up house builders, they've ended up as Persimmon Homes, Hallam Land Management and Taylor Wimpey. We act on behalf of them, but right from the outset, actually our work was, which is a point I'll sort of be making, where we really worked in close collaboration with the local authorities. The wider consultant team as well, who were employed by the consortium, actually most are still on board today, 20 years on as well, which is quite rare, I think, in these big major projects. A brief sort of plotted history for you. I'll try and canter through it. There's a lot of knowledge over the last 20, 25 years from within the company, but if I just take you back to the start, where the idea for new settlement in Devon came from, it was very much led by, as I say, the county council. Through their structure plan work in the late 90s, they identified the pressures and the need for development in Plymouth, Exeter and Torbay particularly. There was also a shift in the economic role that they wanted to deliver around Exeter, rather than from the sort of tourism-based southwest economy. There was a need to create new jobs, and where should that be focused? And Exeter became a real sort of hub for that. Exeter is very constrained, and I'm sure a lot more of you know than I do who are local, by its topography. And so the new settlement came forward as an option, as a real genuine viable alternative to that sort of continued peripheral growth. So right from the start, it was, as I say, it was a sort of county council project, but the sustainability agenda was very high up in the forefront of the discussions, and hence they're sort of forward thinking, we are going to look for a site for new settlement to drive that economic growth. I found this in our archives. This is a sort of a plan from 1996 that sort of showed that area of economic activity. Sorry, it's a bit blurred, but it's where they were sort of looking at, and you can see Exeter, and then to the east of it is where they sort of site where you can see a little aeroplane, and then an asterisk to the east of that or northeast of that aeroplane, and that was where they were focusing in on their idea of where a new settlement could go, following on from all of that sort of strategic planning work, looking at constraints, the landscape, the topography. Where it should be located at the time, as people have mentioned over the last couple of days, PPG3, RPG10, sort of all the sequential test work still had to be done. But from within DLA, David Lock, our sort of founder, Bob Brightman was master planner at the time, and Nick Freer, a planner, all worked for a client, and had a very sort of unique role really, where they worked closely with the county council to provide information where they were looking at the strategic, physical and policy constraints, and very much the idea of investment in new transport infrastructure. And when they were sort of focusing in on that site to the east of Exeter Airport, there was this idea that actually there's the railway, it runs from Waterloo to Exeter, so it's the slower line, but there was identified that a new station could be delivered, and what an impact that could make on the wider economic area. So the early work was harnessing that housing need, the economic driver of activity. If we could deliver a new station, it could support the housing, it could support the economy, and also an intermodal rail freight terminal that was proposed at the time. sadly not delivered. Once a location was identified, East Devon then was sort of brought on board. And I have to say that at the time, I wasn't involved then, but what I've learnt was it was very much a Devon County Council idea. But politically, East Devon were brought together through early engagement. The number of 15,000 objections I know about because there's a planner now working at East Devon who was involved in processing all those objections. And a lot of hard work was done collectively, working together by the county and East Devon to overcome those concerns about this idea of a building in a greenfield area. There was nothing there other than a few villages, but that worked together, overcame those objections, and the site was allocated then in the East Devon local plan in, I think, 2006. Just quickly touching on that area, that sort of economic strategy, it became known as part of the Exeter and East Devon Growth Point. And that's something that's carried on, and today there's a lot of work being done by East Devon Council in driving all of these sites. This plan here shows some of the sites that haven't been delivered. The intermodal rail freight terminal, if you do go and visit it, like around the rest of the country, sadly, but we need them. It's a Lidl and an Amazon depot, so the rail freight didn't work. But Cranbrook is there. Flybe, unfortunately, were a casualty, and the airport has been struggling. I'm not the expert on that, but again, it has changed over time rather than it was envisaged to grow and become a much greater part of the sort of southwest economy. Once the site was allocated, the work that we'd been doing originally for Wilson Connolly to sort of work with Devon County Council to try and identify a site, the plan on the left was the original master planning that DLA prepared, and that was focused on, in the middle of it you can see a little sort of white blob and then a central avenue going up to where the station was to be located. And at the time our project was called Clist Hayes. There was another competing site that then came on board called Southbrook, which was to the east of that, so some other developers sort of got off the back of once there was identified need for housing in the area. The local political concerns, one about the airport and the impact on getting too close to the airport and the impact that might have on its growth potential in the future. And also local residents, the original village of Rockbeer, meant the two schemes merged together and we became one. And so the whole group of developers agreed that they would together form what became known as the East Devon New Community Consortium. And the name, as I say, Cranbrook, I think I put up on there, the stream that ran through the middle is where the name Cranbrook came from. And that was picked by local councillors, I'm fairly sure, at the start of my involvement. Some key things, it's been fascinating listening to everyone's talks over the last couple of days, and as everyone's been talking, I've sort of thought to myself, I could mention that about Cranbrook and I could mention this, but sort of some key points I'll try and feed in quickly. The master planning and the vision work, the word vision, it is essential. It was prepared in complete collaboration with Devon and East Devon and that consortium of developers, and with the consultant team at that table. So I think it worked in terms of it was their vision, but we helped to articulate it. And perhaps something I want to sort of feed into this, I think, is one of my key lessons learned, is that sort of shared working and the pool of resources that became available to Devon at the time and East Devon, that they were able to call upon ourselves and the other consultant team, perhaps help out where they may not have had the resource at that time. Super hearing what is going on in Cambridgeshire, and I know how you work together, which is fantastic. And I think at the time, perhaps, whether we helped to sort of facilitate that, to give an extra resource to the authorities that may otherwise not have been there. In terms of then what happened next, so the local plan was adopted, and during all of that time, because we'd been working up the vision, we'd been working up the master plan, and I say we, but work at DLA and this wider consultant team for the councils, planning applications were submitted while the local plan was going on to prove deliverability, and outline planning permission then was granted in 2010. Just to show you the vision, this was prepared, as I say, back in, let's say, sort of from 2005 to 2010. Yeah, that was the sort of key strapline of the vision. It was to be of Devon, but the sustainability, the vibrancy, the attractive town, and meeting the needs of the 21st century lifestyles. It was accepted it was going to be built in this short time frame compared to all other Devon settlements that had been built I don't think there'd been any other new town since the sort of medieval ages. So it was sort of very much, how are we going to build this town in this very short time scale? So those points of the vision, I won't run through them all, but I think they're still very much at the forefront of what we've all been talking about today, from the landscape and the ecology, the vibrancy of the town, the high quality urban environment, and that the town was going to grow. In terms of actually what was approved, so back in 2010, we produced this plan became known as the Development Framework Plan. I think now generally through planning we're approving a series of parameters plans, but it set, as parameters plans do now, where the location of those key land uses would be. Some key things I picked up on that people didn't know about: it does include a new railway station, the town is served by a district heating scheme. We had a large town centre in the middle, which did move as a result of stakeholder and community engagement, where it was going to be, it couldn't be near the station. I was going to touch on this later, but I'll touch on it now. The station, the brown blob, sort of in the northwest, is where it had to go. We had hoped for it to be the sort of centre of the town, with a spine road going up to it, but the green is all floodplain. And we were restricted on where the station could go because of Network Rail, well, not that they were that at the time, but in terms of actually, for safety reasons, where the station had to be located. And we had hoped to be able to run a road that would go up to the station and back down again. It would be the bus route through the town, but we couldn't do that. Environment Agency worked very closely with us, but to compensate for it, we could only build one road straight up to it and straight back again. So sort of working to harness those constraints to make them work for the town, so the floodplains all become a country park, which I gather from residents, including somebody who was here yesterday, who I happened to be sitting next to, who lived in Cranbrook. He said what a fantastic sort of lung the country park is for the town. And the town centre in the middle, as I say, originally we had hoped it would be run by the station, but in the end it was decided that the sort of spine road going through the town would serve as a bus route, and therefore all development actually centred on the town centre in the middle. Quickly on actually the planning permission itself. Back in 2010 what we did was, so we had that development framework plan, and then there was a series of supporting strategies that were approved by the local authority at that time, prior to determination, with the intention that they would then guide the reserve matters applications. It's what we're all doing sort of now, but we did do it sort of 15 years ago as well. So there was a high-level strategic design guidance document, and then it was 3 lever arch files of paper at the time, landscape, biodiversity and drainage strategy. There are probably 2 or 3 key plans in that document, and they are still used today. We're part of the Bible, really, of delivering the new town. The other strategies, all equally as important, set out the detail that had sort of fed into the planning permission and were to be taken account of as reserve matters were developed. The outline consent had lasted for 12 years, and that's expired now. The last applications were submitted in 22 and are just going through the process still now. Just touching on that design guidance, that was the document. So we worked this up in collaboration, as I say, with the authorities. It was high level. It did set out to create distinctiveness. We worked very closely, I'm going to say, with our client group and the council to try and push the design agenda then. I'm not going to go into that in detail today, that's probably a topic for another day, but the ideas at the time were there that you would concentrate the higher quality along this bus route, the spine road. There are reasons why that hasn't happened, but the intention was there, and it was then to be followed by more detailed documents in advance of each phase of development. The landscape and biodiversity and drainage strategies I mentioned, it was a key part of the vision, locally particularly, that it should be set within its local landscape and ecological setting. So there was a huge amount of work done right from day one by the landscape architects in terms of the tree and mapping the local ecology and landscape setting. Farm tracks were retained as green corridors, harnessing the constraints. And as I've touched on, it's still used to the day, the sort of very detailed plans. That's just sort of one example of them. Integrated transport. I added this sort of in last night because I thought it is interesting. I think that people don't realise how it was a new station that's been built, and it's been built within the floodplain, so we had to compensate for it but it is accessed by the spine road that became known as the main local route, ensuring that all development was within 400 metres of a bus route. And along that road, the shared cycleway footways on both sides. The design of that, I think, is going to be adapted in the expansion, partly because of the sort of conflict of cycling and walking, but it's a good design topic that's still being discussed, so any comments do feed into East Devon, because they're sort of looking at how that should roll out in the sort of next phase of development. The speed control through design, perhaps just another key point I've picked up on that people have been talking about. The Highway Authority at Devon were very instrumental particularly, and they were very keen for no yellow lines, no there's some traffic calming through to reduce the speed. Ben Hamilton Bailey was involved sort of in the early days, so a lot of sort of key designers who had an influence on Cranbrook.
Sarah, sorry, you're at time.
Oh, okay. I'll sum up quickly. Sorry, I'm talking too long. That's okay. So district heating, I can talk about all day, and then delivery, those are the people involved in delivering it. Quickly, just to finish on some reflections. What helped the early delivery? Leadership, Devon County Council in the early days, taken on then by East Devon, and then monthly meetings. I think one of the two key points I want to make are we met monthly. There's a consortium of developers, Devon County Council and East Devon. It helped to ensure political buy-in and the shared ownership of the project, and it became a forum for solving and understanding issues. Those became weekly meetings to deliver the first Reserve Matters application. Early and continuous stakeholder engagement, everyone's been talking about loans and funding. How did we get on to deliver? I suppose my other key point is, so 2008 recession, planning permission was granted in 2010, and there was some key funding that was agreed that helped us to deliver those facilities right from day one. And that just, there you go, sort of gives the timeline. So from Reserve Matters in 2011, show home was opened the following year, primary school 3 months later in September, multi-purpose building 6 months later, Clifton bypass that year, and the railway station just 2 years later, with 30% affordable housing delivered across the town from day one. And who helped build it? Minister and community officers were appointed. They had a vital role in establishing from day one. They set up the running club, they set up, so as those first residents moved in, they were there, and they helped to deliver those clubs and societies that are still there today. Town Council were established 2 years later, and they play a vital role today in carrying on delivering that. One key problem that in terms of if you spoke to anybody who lived in Cranbrook, what's been the problem? Delivering a town centre has been very hard over the last 10 years. Attracting those employment uses, we've tried. Certain ones that didn't join East Devon were going to move their offices there. We tried to get extra training, technical college, but they moved into a building when Flybe went bust. And the massive change in retail. But again, that's a topic others have covered. But it's getting there. The first buildings have come out of the ground now, a concept Morrison's store, and East Devon have taken on the land that's been handed to them by the consortium, and they're consulting on that actually at the moment. Future-proofing, it was considered from the outset, so the plan that was, we knew it was going to grow to 8,000. East Devon have taken that on themselves, and they are now running that through a DPD. And so the original plan allowed for change. Reflections on design, working together. I think it set the standard at the start, but unfortunately when that working together stopped for various political reasons and the decision to shift to policy rather than working together, perhaps has meant that it stifled the design because of that lack of ownership and the sort of shared vision to deliver. And Newtown's back on the agenda. I think some people have mentioned it, which we do, I think, well, personally believe it perhaps should not be through the conventional call for sites in the local plan. It shouldn't just be the scaling up of strategic sites. We've got to look to those geographic spatial planning, identify sites, working for housing and employment delivery, and an importance of collaborative working and that robust early engagement and learning from what's past. And then just very quickly, there you go, I've just done a leaflet to say if you want to go and visit Cranbrook on your way back by car or by train, I've left some leaflets at the door, and do take one and go and have a look. Sorry, there you go.